I have a colleague who interviewed pregnant and she still got the job. So I really do think it comes down to company culture. And, I'm lucky to work for a company like Toyota that it's possible.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa with Law Trades. So happy to be here with you all today. In case you don't know what we do, we connect busy in-house GCs with flexible remote support from around the world. One of the most common areas that we end up helping with is parental leave coverage. We're super passionate about this topic. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our moderator for the day, Ashley, founder and CEO, manager of Manager Method, to kick things off. Ashley?
Thanks, Melissa. Well, I think I'll go ahead and combine intros with the first question. So we'll mix things up and get very efficient here. So we're talking about parental leave today. So I thought it'd be great to start out with each of these in-house leaders. If you want to give a quick introduction and then tell what your parental leave policy currently is. Meredith, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Meredith Smith. I'm the general counsel at Stash. We are a banking investing app designed for the 99% to help all people build wealth. I was at Sullivan and Cromwell before that for about 8 years in their financial institutions group, doing all sorts of things. But I've been at Stash for about 5 years now. For the second part of the question, parental leave. When I started at Stash, or a startup, we had none because we didn't have a policy, and we also had no one taking parental leave. And now 5 years later, we are at 16 weeks paid. We just upped it about a month ago from 12 weeks. So as a part of just a rollout of a whole new set of employee-friendly benefits. So really happy at where we are right now.
Oh, that's super exciting. I love that. May, you want to introduce yourself and talk about your parental leave policy?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. May Ortiz. I'm an employment lawyer at Toyota Motor North America. We design, build, and sell the cars. And I am a mom of 3. So I have a 7-year-old daughter, a 5-year-old son, and a 10-month-old daughter. So I'm remembering because I just probably, maybe most recently of this panel, just took some leave. So I'm really excited and passionate about this topic. As far as our policies, we didn't have paid parental leave unless you were, giving birth. So it's like the 6 to 8 weeks, depending if you had a C-section or other birth. But now in 2022, we have 2 weeks paid for parents, whether you're mom or dad, adoption, surrogacy, all that. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. I love that. Deanna, you want to bring us out, do an intro and talk about the parental leave policy at your organization?
Sure, Ashley. Hi, everyone. My name is Deanna Kwong. I'm a director in the Office of Operations, Legal, and Administrative Affairs at Hewlett Packard Enterprise company. Our CLO, our Chief Legal Officer, is also our company's Chief Operating Officer. So our organization includes not only legal, but also a lot of other global functions, including corporate affairs and global IT, and several others. And our company parental leave policy is, back in 2019, we implemented a new one where we now offer all new parents 6 months of paid leave following the birth or adoption of a child. And in addition, we also offered several other benefits and what we consider innovative career support options, including Wellness Fridays. So we close our offices at 2 p.m. local time on a designated Friday every month. This month, it's tomorrow for us. And that's really to give team members an opportunity to focus on physical or emotional health or spend time on your own personal career development or with your families. In addition, we've offered parental transition support. So new parents also have the opportunity to work part-time for up to 36 months following the birth or adoption of a child. And then we have something called Career Reboot as well, where we do offer job opportunities at HPE to individuals such as stay-at-home parents who might have temporarily been out of the workforce for an extended period of time, but are ready to restart their careers. And all of this just goes into what we see as our very unique culture at HPE, where we really value our employees' lives, both inside and outside of the office, as our Chief People Officer said. And within our Office of Operations, Legal, and Administrative Affairs in particular, we have it's our acronym's OLA, because of those different organizations that fall under John's leadership. We call it living the OLA good life, which is in harmony with purpose. And so we try to optimize the harmony of our team members' lives in terms of the different hats they wear and the different pieces that make up their well-being. And of course, for those who are parents, that includes their roles as new parents or as their kids grow older, and we want to balance that in harmony with their roles at work.
I love hearing that. One thing that I took away from all three of you is this advancement that more benefits are being added. And so I love seeing when organizations are adding, new benefits that reflect the reality that parents need. And so to me, it's really encouraging to hear that over the last 3 years, you've each had some of those transformations. And especially Deanna, as you talk to the culture, love seeing how that comes to life. I think one thing in a culture of any legal department is going to be preparation is key. That's a key subculture, I think, for any of us as lawyers. And so as you think about preparing, so if someone's taking leave, and I love, Deanna, hearing some of those post-leave benefits, but going back a bit to before someone's taking leave, thinking about how you prepare the whole team. So not just that person, but also the rest of the team. So May, do you want to talk about how you've managed that, or you've seen that managed?
Yeah, it's been, at least on our legal team, it did start with me, right? Like, I looked at my work, my projects, and kind of proposed a plan, whether I need someone to just handle that client, like that business unit generally as the GC of that business unit, or whether I had like long-term compliance, audity, type projects like that, where it was in that stage, and then assessing whether I thought it could pause or it had to be something that could continue. And then I sort of just proposed it to my AGC, my manager, and said, this is what I have, this is what I think makes sense, to get her perspective on who could cover, right? Because she's going to have a bigger view, Meredith, probably in your role, your view of your entire team and what their workload is, and then determine whether we need to bring someone in, or whether, some things will just take pause and just be shuffled amongst the team. Because our policy is, like 12 weeks, it is very manageable. I don't know what it's like, Deanna, if it's like for 6 months, or maybe, we hear of other companies like Netflix, et cetera, who have a year or more. Maybe that's more difficult. But as far as the pre-work, it started with me, what I thought, and then I kind of proposed it.
Deanna, what are you seeing as far as like a longer tenure and how you fill in and support the rest of the team so that they're not feeling overburdened when that person's out? And as far as the length, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think in general, it's a testament to just the close collaboration of our teams just on a normal everyday basis in the course of business, that when a team member does indicate that they will be taking time off for a momentous occasion of a birth or adoption of a child, I think we do try to divide up the work of the person who will be out in a way that it doesn't put a burden on any one particular colleague while that person is out. I think we try to establish a very open line of communication throughout the chain of reporting. And so I think that's been successful for us. And particularly with, I think if you look at the sort of litigation side of legal, sometimes it's a little bit easier to anticipate what the upcoming deadlines are with the litigation schedule in place, a little bit less so perhaps on the corporate side. And so we just try to be very agile and be able to pivot when necessary. But so far we found it's worked, so long as we just have open conversation and communication. I think that kind of goes to the earlier point I made about our culture, where I think if we have a very strong collaborative culture where people are open to talking about if they need help, then it helps to make parental leave situations go more smoothly as well.
Yeah. And I think the question often talking about, do you spread work amongst the team? Do you bring someone else in? It's always that question. And there's a lot that can go into it. Like you're both talking about the work, the length. Meredith, I know you've used, so Law Trades has gotten us all together today. I know this is their bread and butter. And I know you've worked with Law Trades before. When you are bringing someone in to help out during that period of time, what does that look like from a preparation standpoint? And how do you make that successful in your work there at Stash?
Yeah, I did. I think, I have a small legal team, and the way I approach leave is with a small legal team, you can't just add on to people who are already really close to 100% capacity. So for me, it was really, really important to make sure that the people who were not taking leave on the team weren't just picking up the extra work. Like it takes a lot of looking into the role, what each team member is doing, really trying to estimate like like Deanna was talking about, like what litigation it is coming up. It really takes a lot of planning to try to figure out like what is the scope of that workload and what can we push, what can we not prioritize, what can people who are non-lawyers do? Is there a workflow or a process we can put in place to let HR do some of these things without us for a little bit? So like there's a lot of ways you can get creative. But for me, at some point, I really just needed people to do the work. So I did have some temporary help from a couple folks at Law Trades. But one came in while I actually was personally on leave, and one came in when a team member went on leave, and the type of person I got in each of those was a little different depending on what was going on at the time, and what we really needed, and whether we needed someone just to step in for someone and just take over their job, or whether we were shifting work around and shifting off some commercial work to someone who could step in. So I think planning, and really doing the legwork up front to figure out what is, if you are using someone like Law Trades, like what is the real profile you need and about how much time do you need? Because the more you can get that fit right from up front, the more successful it's going to be. Also, track the work that start tracking, months out from when the person is on leave, what really they're doing, where are the documents, what's the status, who's the outside counsel point, but kind of the same theme, planning, so that someone can step into the shoes and be onboarded and also offboarded pretty quickly.
May, I know you've worked with external resources as well that have come in. From a timing perspective, what do you see as needed for that onboarding perspective, May?
Yeah, so candidly, I had 2 leaves while, in-house. And, certainly the first time took longer. That was probably like, I gave, my team a 6 to 8 week kind of headway, but also trying to, connect with clients and have meetings and kind of like introductory meetings. There's a lot of meetings, right? We're all in-house, we get that. But making sure the clients and the customers feel really comfortable and they know who to go to. Because I don't know about y'all, but sometimes if there's not a level of trust, the clients will just hold on to the work until they go to the person that they trust. You don't want that, right? And then the second time around, we sort of had a system down. So that was 4 weeks. I gave people, 4 months. And I think that came with trust of the system worked before, so let's just copy and paste. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if other people on the panel, their experience was different, but at the very least, it was at least a month, maybe 2 months.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that overlap in particular, I think Deanna, you said generally you tend to spread it out, so maybe this isn't applicable, but Meredith, I think that question is a good one of how people work shoulder to shoulder, how that works. And every once in a while, I don't know if you all have ever seen forum shopping in the in-house world of people trying to go to a different person and thinking the answer may shake up a little bit, but that can also be super intimidating for someone coming into an organization to know what's to say. So Meredith, how do you work with that and think about that overlap of people working together and ensure that clients are supported, but also it's not a cat's away challenge during that leave?
Yeah, I reach out to really any business folks who are going to be impacted. Again, we're at a pretty small company, so it's not tremendously difficult to do that. But as far as the overlap, I did two weeks on both ends, and that's not including all like the prep work with this is what I'm working on. That's just the overlap of if you're getting someone additional on board, let them overlap for a couple weeks on both sides so that like all the information can be imparted, include business folks in some of those conversations as they're getting up to speed and familiar with the person. But also a lot of that is understanding your company culture and the person you're hiring and them coming in and feeling really good that they'll be a good fit and be able to like hit the ground running with how you want to be a business partner to your folks. So again, the planning and the interviewing, really important to get the right person who's going to be the right fit. Because if it doesn't click, we all spend so much time, building those relationships, and it is hard for someone to come in and just pick it up for a couple months and go back out. So it takes a certain type and definitely a certain type of skill set, I think, for people to be able to come in and do that successfully.
I think that makes sense. And I know I said that, as we were talking about post-parental leave, we were going to take it back to preparing, but I think I'd like to go back even a little bit more, especially as we've gotten a couple questions in. And so we'll touch on these because I think they're super important points. And they go back even further before you're really thinking about your team. And one is, so all three of you talked about in the most recent years, there have been different benefits added. So Deanna, as all of these great new benefits are added for the kind of whole spectrum of supporting parents, what's legal's involvement look like in that? And do you ever see legal as a driver? Not asking anybody for attorney-client privilege, but do you ever see legal as a driver? And what do you see legal's role is in those benefits? That's a question we got in that I think is super spot on. What do you think, Deanna?
Yeah, so I will qualify all my answers today that they may not necessarily reflect those of my companies. I know it's a very lawyerly qualifier, but I would say in general, I mean, my view is always that it doesn't hurt for legal to be involved proactively in any policy making or, quite frankly, sort of any areas, just because it's much better to preempt issues than try to stop them when they arise. And so I think there definitely is a role for legal to be involved in the development of parental leave policies.
Yeah. What about you, May?
If I could say ditto to the disclaimer, and then, I don't, if this is the panel's collective approach, but generally, right, we are not always consulted just for legal advice. So a lot of times, right, like you put your legal hat on and say legally XYZ, blah, taking that hat off, really helping our clients. What's our why? What's our culture? Is this the right thing? Respect for people is one of our core values. What do we think is the respectful thing to do? Balancing, I understand, business interests. So yeah, I think it's very helpful for us to be in the room. I think if we are trusted advisors, it speaks highly of our department if we're consulted, even if beyond legal advice. Just like what is the right direction for the company? And ultimately, I think as in-house counsel, that's where we want to be.
Yeah, this is one I'd like hearing all three talks, especially Meredith. So as a general counsel of a company, so many people look and see you as a general counsel of a company, but that still means you're an employee of the company and everything apply. Lawyers are shockingly, I know, still people, but all the benefits of employees still flow. And so I think that's really important to delineate your lawyer hat and your employee hat and thinking about the people. So Meredith, especially as you're at the table with the rest of leadership and adding benefits on, how does that look as a leader? And what do you see as legal? How do you navigate your legal hat and your employee hat in that situation?
Yeah, I think, I think when I was hired at Stash, I remember having this conversation with one of the other folks on the exec team who told me, you're a business person. You're not actually just a lawyer here. You're a business person. You just happen to have a legal background. And that always stuck with me because I come to the table just like anybody else, kind of representing their department and representing, employees who they've heard from and who have relationships with them and share with them. But I have a particular perspective, but it doesn't mean that I can't contribute to, what kind of benefits should we think about, to offer at Stash, because I know, again, the people at Stash, the culture, our mission, there's a lot about Stash that I know just like any other exec. I just happen to be able to think of it from a different perspective. But there are a whole host of benefits when, as a small legal team, like I don't try to insert lawyers where we don't need them. So there's a whole bunch of great benefits where we really don't need to get involved. They're big providers. The contracts are unnegotiable, so there's like, I don't like wasting legal team time on some of the things where we aren't needed, but there's a whole host that really need the legal expertise too. And in my position, it usually ends up being on the employee equity side, getting a little bit away from parental leave, but there's at my company and kind of the growth we went through, we still offer stock options to our employees. There's a lot happening in employee equity world that I'm almost always at the table for that and feel like I can provide a whole lot of input, both legal and non-legal, for that in particular.
I think it's an incredibly important point that across all of the issues, again, you have that insight and you may have that special knowledge based on a lawyer, but when you're coming to it, and it's wonderful to be at the table where you are treated as a business equal. I know not all lawyers expect that, so you better watch out, Meredith. People are going to be coming for your job. But another area, as we think about even before preparing people for leave, is taking leave. I do a lot on social media, and I have so many comments. Anytime I do a video about parental leave or things, I have so many comments, including lawyers that will say, I'm so scared to bring it up because I'm afraid I won't get the job because they'll think I'm going to take leave right away, or all of that. So it's that fear of bringing it up and all of that entails. So Meredith, how do you think about that? And how do you proactively talk about it with your team, or people are interviewing, especially as you've increased the benefit? And are you mindful to think about talking to female and male candidates about it? Like, how do you think about that with people and eliminating that stigma that people unfortunately still often have to bring it up?
Yeah, I think it's been really important, at least in my company, to have employees see like senior leadership, not just exec team, but like senior leadership actually taking leaves and taking the full leaves, not just kind of like, putting up their Slack away message, but continuing to answer. But really seeing people live by, we want you to take leave and really respect that time with your family. I think it starts with leadership. And since I've been at Stash, both of our co-founders have went out on leave. I've gone out on leave. I mean, we've had multiple folks on the exec team. Many of us have multiple kids. So really setting the tone that it's okay. And even at a company where you don't have a ton of employees, and we always feel like we don't have enough resources to go around, we always figure out coverage in a way that works and lets people really, really take the time and respect that time.
I love that about being really vocal. And like you said, not just the most senior leaders, but all through the senior leadership lines, and not just taking the leave in window dressing, but still being there and setting that, really living by that example, I think is super powerful. I mean, as you took it as GC, we'll talk in a little bit about what that was like and how that has its own, challenges. But Deanna, what about you? As far as, do you see situations when people interview and are they bringing it up, or do you proactively bring up all those wonderful benefits you have? What do you see is your role and what you can do to minimize that stigma or fear about bringing up parental leave?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't stick out in my mind as something that folks do or don't necessarily ask about in an interview setting, but I will say, consistent with what Meredith said, I think setting that culture and understanding that we proactively would like team members to take leave when they need to. And I think it goes beyond parental leave, but also setting the stage with vacation, for example. And as I mentioned, we have Wellness Fridays at our company. Just seeing senior leaders proactively encourage their direct teams and the people leaders on their teams to then cascade down to their individual contributors that we really do want you to take this time away for yourself, because it basically is a win-win for everybody. The team member gets rejuvenated, refreshed, but it also helps to, when they come back, increase productivity and hopefully execution excellence when they come back. So I think that's one great way to sort of set a stage in a culture such that when parental leave questions come up, folks see it as simply a continuation of the culture that's already been established with vacation, for example, or at our company, Wellness Fridays.
Yeah, I love that, thinking of the total package. May, what about you? Are you seeing that at times, of people nervous to bring it up, or someone ever talked about that? Or if people haven't, do you feel like that's an underlying feeling and that in-house departments should proactively be bringing that up to the people on the team so that they're not afraid of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll definitely say, because I was in private practice before, it was a lot scarier in firm life, such that I would try to hide the pregnancy as far as I could, until, at some point people could tell it wasn't just I was fat or something, right? Like I really was having a baby and then having to tell. So, comparing that experience to in-house, I certainly felt it was a lot easier in-house. And I'll say it does come down to company culture. We can talk a lot of corporate speak and culture and all that, but look, when I brought it up with my manager, she was like, and I always almost like instantly apologetic, right? Like, oh, I'm on leave, don't worry, I'm going to create a plan, we're going to be good. And my manager's like, stop, congratulations, we'll talk about that stuff later. How do you feel about it? Are you excited? And that really set the tone. That was a sigh of relief of like, we're not going to talk logistics, we'll handle that. I'm just so excited for you, you know? And just to speak a little bit highly of my company, I have a colleague who interviewed pregnant and she still got the job. So I really do think it comes down to company culture. And, you know, I'm lucky to work for a company like Toyota that it's possible. And one of my BFFs, my old firm work wife, she interviewed pregnant at PepsiCo and got the job. So I think the movement is there, that it is no longer stigmatized, but it does start with leadership.
I think you're exactly right. And it is, again, like when I've done videos on parental leave and things like that, it's so interesting and how scary it is for people to announce pregnancy. I mean, people, it's a fear. I think we really is a fear. It is. And people in their mind can worry. And so I say it can either be like bearable or terrible. And so the reaction, because if someone immediately, the reaction is, oh, well, we'll have to see, you know, like you can just the body language, or someone's like, that's amazing. It's that sigh of relief that I think does send that signal to the whole organization, kind of going back to what Deanna said about living that culture. And so I think it's so important for in-house teams to think about that, how you're reacting, because so many people out there, and whether they're saying it or they're making comments on social media, is telling people we'll never disclose until you've actually started, because it's all this fear of someone taking that job away from you or not hiring you. And as all three of you have talked about, giving that leave, you know, is a temporary thing. And I'm sure that any global attendees are going to be horrified that we're not giving anything less than a year. And I lived in Australia for a couple of years, so I know that all too well. But I just think it's a super helpful reminder for in-house legal teams of having that support, especially in leadership. And so a question we just got that I think really plays into this is, Meredith, because I know, you know, Mandy, and you're big organizations. And so the good thing is big organizations, it can be harder at times to get something done, but it's at Stash. A question came in saying that someone works for a startup, not a huge legal team, but in growth mode, which is obviously a part of everyone in tech. Startups is very familiar with everything that can mean in real life, but they do not have a parental leave policy. And so how does someone bring that up to the C-suite? And so as you talked about, Meredith, it happened, as often happens in startups, things happen because when there's a need, but how do you see a nice way to bring that up to the C-suite and have that raised if someone's not sure what to do?
Yeah, I think it just has to be. And to be honest, at a startup, there are many things that you just do not put in place until there is a circumstance that requires you to put it in place. And it does not mean that the company or the leadership team or whatever does not think they need one. It just hasn't been necessary yet. So resources to put together a parental leave policy and everything that's required there just hasn't been done yet. So there's always going to be a first person. I remember the first person at Stash, and I won't call her out by name, but I specifically remember the first person. And I remember we were small and we were in person at the time, so you could see she was pregnant, which doesn't happen all the time anymore because people are on camera. But we were like, all right, it's time for a parental leave policy. Let's figure out what other people do. Let's hit up our network, you know, figure out what we want to do here. And there just is going to be that first person that starts that. But just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean that anyone agrees it shouldn't be there. I think it'll probably, if you're at the right place, people are just going to say, of course we need one, you know, let's do it. Let's put the resource in there and get it in place. So I think, you know, see something, say something. If it's got to be done, somebody's got to speak up and it'll happen.
Yeah, Ashley, can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so certainly, of course, I'm not speaking from a startup perspective in terms of my company, but I think the point is equally applicable that nowadays, I think the job market and the mindset of employees is very different than what it was pre-pandemic. Insofar as I think there's a higher prioritization on a better work-life balance and the benefits that a company might offer beyond simply the subject matter of the particular role that a person might be looking to interview for and or keep if in their current role. And so I think that's certainly a good argument, especially with the Great Resignation. And if you look at studies recently on what may prompt an employee to leave their existing employer to go to a new one if the benefits or the work-life balance isn't something that is appealing to them in terms of where they're at in their personal lives. They'd much rather interview at a new place and start over than stay at their existing company. And I think for a startup in a growth phase, that's particularly important, where if you're looking to not only retain your top talent who's already there, but assuming you're also expanding your workforce, having a parental leave policy in place is one of, in my view, sort of the cornerstone components to attracting that talent who are looking for a company that recognizes that we all are people beyond the role we play at work, and that folks are increasingly demanding, particularly generationally, I think, earlier career individuals are looking for companies that expressly recognize and support a healthier work-life balance.
Yeah, I think it's right. I think there's always silver linings that pop up. I tell that to my kids, but I do think parental leave and other benefits are one that really do seem to have happened over the last couple of years. So we've gone through this life cycle now, appropriate life cycle of thinking about putting policies into place, thinking about preparing. But when you take leave and you go out, oftentimes as lawyers in particular, you might hear my dog speaking of 2020 to 2022 realities. But so as you go to take leave as lawyers, often, especially with your first, I don't know if you've experienced this, but so much of your identity is tied up in being a lawyer, or you might be the person, especially if you're high up in that leadership. And so, Meredith, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you, when you're a GC and you're going out, how you manage to strip away as much as possible and what that possible looks like from your role to really take that leave and recharge, and how you empower your team to step up during that time, in addition to any other resources you bring on, but those kind of dual, both for yourself and then your team. So how'd you do that? And I'd love to hear everyone else's after that as well.
Yeah. I really tried to manage people's expectations and start early with, this is when I'm, due to go out, this is how long I'm going to take, this is what I'm going to do when I'm out. Like I really, I had it all in a large spreadsheet of my different work streams, but right up top, I said, like, do not expect me to respond like during the day. Like if you need something urgent, like here's my cell phone number, but like, it's got to take a lot to have to call my cell phone. So like really setting the expectation that I was really unavailable. I think for most lawyers in particular, it's actually our responsibility to tune out just as much as it is the folks who you work with to really respect the boundary, because we just want to handle it. And I think when I was out, I watched quite a bit. You have a baby, you're at home, you have your cell phone, everything's available on Slack and email. And I watched, but I made a very concerted effort to not chime in on things, because the second people see you starting to chime in, they have the expectation again that you're there and that you will chime in. And I think most of the times, if you are building a team and you hire correctly and you rely on your team, they so often can really rise to the occasion, and really should from a professional development perspective. And they can do it. And if you're not the crutch there, they do it, and they do it really, really, really well. I mean, my team was absolutely amazing when I was out, but I think a lot of it is about expectations and the expectation setting for everybody.
Yeah. May, I know you said you may have taken the leave most recently, and having three, there's always the chart of first. I saw a great video the other day about even cutting strawberries, your first child versus your second or later child, which is like the neat for the first child. The second one was like eating them and throwing them in the sink. And yeah. I won't admit that, but May, how did you balance that when you go to take leave, and to really be able to take that time and not feel that temptation to work? And again, my global people are like, what are you talking about? Just take the time. But
we're so atrocious. But I would say that with this most recent leave, the company rightly did it for me. Right. I mean, I love, Meredith, what you say, like we have to sometimes be saved from ourselves, especially if we were brought up or raised, so to speak, in big law life, right? Like always on, and, and we're customer service oriented, right? So, and I say that because with this most recent leave, I was cut off, no email access, no anything. And y'all, it was transformational. It was so good for my mental health. I didn't even realize it would have made such a difference, because with my second baby, instead of my third, I didn't have the cutoff and I couldn't help myself. I mean, my manager had to be like, May, stop responding. We got this. So it was really me, Meredith, to your point. I was really me. I couldn't help it. And so when my systems got cut off this recent time, it was the best. Really, it was really the best for my mental health.
What about you, Deanna? How do you manage that, or see others manage that with any temptation to work when you really need to be taking time off?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while for me since I've been on parental leave. My kids are a lot older, but I think it's also, again, going to my earlier point about putting into place practices that when it comes time to parental leave, you've flexed that muscle already. And I think that's the same with vacation time. I think speaking from experience, sometimes have a hard time winding down right at the start of a vacation. You are so used to just being on all the time in terms of checking email and being responsive that, at least for me, it often takes a day or two or more to really truly turn it off and take vacation. And I think if you practice that with time off before parental leave, then hopefully when it gets time to let go at that point, it's a little bit easier. But I think, again, it goes to that greater culture and hopefully support that someone preparing to go out on leave has from their direct manager and their organization. And that goes to, I think, May, your point about what the response is, right? The tone, the demeanor of a response from a direct manager when you do share your news that you're expecting and or adopting a child and expect to be out on leave. It's the tone of the conversation from your direct leader, I think, can make a huge impact. And I think also just, there are still a lot of, I think, unconscious biases around sort of gender roles, both in the workplace and sort of out. And you see this in little ways where I think men often feel more comfortable and it's more acceptable for them to have pictures of their kids, for example, in their office. But for women, a lot of times you hear stories of how they intentionally don't put those up, no matter how much they, of course, love their children, because they don't want to be, what I've called mommy tracked, or they don't want to be pigeonholed in a way because they do have, children outside of work. So that's a little bit of my sort of shared personal experience. But I think it's flexing your muscles in terms of learning to let go a little bit. But it also is a two-way street where I think if you're in an environment where it's more supportive of someone to do that, you feel less angst about letting go once it's time to do that.
I like the way you put that. I think the support, and it is a good point to think about. And it goes back a lot to leadership, and whether leadership means just seeing people around you as colleagues to up to the senior levels of leadership, showing, bringing their true lives to work and talking and about taking that leave and vocalizing what they're doing and having the pictures up. I do think that sends a lot more signals than almost any words in a policy, honestly. But so let's talk a little bit about if there's ever employees that don't have children, for example, and they see, especially the more generous parental leave benefits you have, do you see challenges or questions of, is this fair, both from the taking the leave perspective to also, are they expected to do more? Do you ever see that pushback? And how do you manage any of those concerns to show that support for employees without children as well? I'm sorry, Meredith, want to kick off for us? We'll start that around.
Yeah. I've never heard it outwardly said. I've never gotten pushback on it. I think if you've built the right team and have the right culture, it's part of life. You want your colleagues to have children and families, and the folks that choose not to or don't, that's perfectly fine too. It's kind of that work-life balance. But even I remember feeling guilty going on leave, both in-house and at the law firm, that there would be people there who would have to pick up some of the work that I was leaving, because work has to get done. There's only so much you can prioritize or push or reallocate. I think the inevitable is that there will be some folks who will pick up a little additional work, even if you get a contractor like from Law Trades to come in to pick up a lot of that. There is a little bit there. And I wanted to be very cognizant of that and talk about it very transparently. And not that everything's about compensation, but I did, I do think that you should think about, after the leave and after you kind of see who picked up work, like, does that deserve additional compensation, whether cash or equity or some sort of, I mean, there's so many different types of benefits. It doesn't just have to be cash nowadays. Like, is there something else you can do to recognize and reward where people might have picked up, even if it's just, you know, calling them out and really thanking them? I think there's a whole spectrum of things that you can do that doesn't necessarily have to be just giving people extra cash either. But I do think people want to feel recognized and rewarded if they really, you know, picked up some of the slack while you're out.
I mean, I think spot on. I think a term of 2022, which has been quiet quitting, a lot of the rationale you see below that is this idea of having more work put on you without anything from a question prioritizing or a thanks, you know, and certainly not a compensation thing. And so I think as you think about that wholeheartedly with the team, and even if it's just a matter of reprioritizing things, giving that thanks, anything you can give, I agree. I think that helps to support all of those, you know, with whatever their life looks like. We did get one question in. So May, I'll ask you for your thoughts generally. So someone's in a situation where they're a DGC, but they have a general counsel. If that general counsel has never taken parental leave, doesn't have children, and is not a fan of leave, then how can you manage in that situation in a larger group to support it for others? And how do you navigate that? Obviously, it can be a challenging topic, but May, any thoughts on that? If you have people with different opinions on taking that leave?
Yeah, I mean, first I want to acknowledge that that's really difficult, right? And I don't know that I have the answer, but I suppose if I were faced in that situation, I would really lean into the relationships that I have with my colleagues and the goodwill to sort of maybe come up with who can help cover me in the background, so that when I present it to my DGC or my leadership, you know, to really, it sucks that if you feel you're unsupported, but hey, it's not going to be a problem. Probably what I did at the firm, right? Don't worry. This case is going to go to my BFF here. This case is going to go over here. It's all good. So I think managing in that way, you know, there's no legal term. It sucks. At the same time, it is effort, probably, you know, for your own career, to make sure that you're managing up, right? And setting those expectations and allaying those fears, if there are some, upon your leadership. And then as an aside, I don't want to judge, but at the same time, culture is so important. Is this a place that you think you should be or want to be? And I say that because even when I interviewed at Toyota at the time, I think I shared, there was not paid parental leave. I was coming from a law firm, and the law firm I was at gave 12 weeks paid at the time, and then 16 weeks now. And I knew that, and I knew I only had one kiddo when I came in-house. And I brought it up in the interview, kind of taking it back to your earlier questions. Right. I brought it up because it's a litmus test for me to know the culture of the company. If that leader winces, the hiring manager is like, ooh, we don't do that, you know, that's a call out to me. And I know I'm diverging just a little bit, but I brought it up, and my current leader now, my AGC, was like, look, I can't give you paid leave, but this is pre-pandemic. She was like, what if when you come back from leave, you don't have to travel and you work from home for 6 months? Wow. You know, that was within her control and her purview. And I could tell that eventually our company might get there, but my leader would be supportive.
Yeah.
May feel a little bit like I'm rubbing in your face, but I'm not. I'm just saying, you're going to have to manage up. That's just the realities if you like where you're working. But if I could submit to you, maybe you want to think about the bigger picture, because when you work at a place where it's not a thing, all that pent up energy and angst, to use Deanna's word, that's better, you know, energy spent elsewhere.
I think it's a great point. And I know when I've taken leave, for example, when I was in-house, it can be harder also if you're in a smaller, like a team of one is really hard. And so I don't know if anyone listening is in a team of that's a whole nother beast. But if you do have other colleagues, even I was in a team of 3 and had a colleague where she and I went back and forth, and we each took 2 months off. And our last month we worked from home part-time, and we knew exactly what we could send each other. And that didn't involve someone calling you at the wrong time. And so having that type of support, managing up, doing whatever within your purview really can be lightning in a bottle, I think, in-house. But let's get to the part of the life cycle, which is coming back to work. So Deanna, as you think about coming back from leave, or as you're talking to someone on your team to help them come back successfully, and we've all if you remember now, maybe a lot more people are remote now. I remember the drive back into work after my second child and crying on the way to work and then getting there and holding a cup of coffee without being afraid of spilling it on someone and having an adult conversation and thinking, oh, this isn't so bad. But Deanna, how do you think about that and advising people to have a more successful re-onboarding process as they return to leave?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, looking at it first from the vantage point of the direct manager or the organization who's welcoming back the person returning from leave, I think it's really important for there to be an express affirmation to that person returning that we understand it's not always a linear return insofar as, you're back and things are up and running, and that you'll have, ups and downs in terms of getting used to being back at work. Dealing with whatever perhaps unique challenges you may have with your child who's now sort of getting adjusted as well in terms of a new parent situation. So I think, the way we've seen it, I've worked with someone who just recently came back from maternity leave, and I thought it was handled fantastically insofar as one of our very senior leaders did, share some of her personal story in terms of when she had gone out on leave way back when, and how she remembered it was a bittersweet time, that, you're going to have ups and downs, and to be communicative if at any point the person returning needs help or, just needs a shift in either responsibilities temporarily and or perhaps at some additional time. I think for the person coming back, I think it's also important to be realistic about it and to show yourself grace. I think for many of us, we're used to being very type A, very driven. As lawyers, our job is predominantly to minimize risk. And so that's how a lot of us have been ingrained to operate. And being comfortable with being agile and taking things, if not one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, and asking for help and finding support. I think that's really helpful. I think just speaking from experience, finding networks, if you're at a small company or a small legal department, just finding support and networks outside, whether that be local bar associations, whether that be other working mothers groups and the like. I think those are incredibly helpful to create a support network if you don't necessarily have that within your own department. I think that's also really helpful, recognizing you're not alone and that what you're experiencing is actually quite common and typical, even though people may not necessarily talk about it.
Yeah, I really like that. And on top of that, I think, May, I know from some of the prep, you'd had some really, really specific practical tips, even like what day you would come back instead of coming back on a Monday, maybe pick a later day in the week. So May, any of those other like things that I was like, oh, that makes sense. I think I totally came back on a Monday. And I'm like, well, I wish I knew you years back. But May, any of those other ones that you have?
Yeah, well, I think that one was like a big one for me, right? Like all the times you're like, I'm going to come back on Monday. Like, why do that yourself? Like when you're at work, Mondays are the worst, right? Like that's why there's Sunday scaries. And so, so come on a Thursday or Friday when business is typically slower, when people have kind of already had their meetings, especially if you work at a place like HP where you have these, these Fridays, right? Like that way you have that time to get through all your email. Right? I don't know how many emails you get, but like give yourself that. It's not just giving yourself that grace, but also kind of planning ahead for what you're going to expect, that chaos, right? For me, another practical tip is also like blocking off time. If you are breastfeeding, if you are pumping, block off that time in your calendar. Include walking time or whatever that is, because you don't want to be caught yourself like meeting to meeting to meeting, and then like you're in pain, right? So kind of those practical things. It takes some time to like sit and think about it intentionally. And of course, for me, it's like scheduling those one-on-ones, because when you first come back, not everyone knows you're back, right? So there's probably, well, I shouldn't take it for granted, Meredith. If you're a small legal team, maybe people are like, yes, you're back. But if you're a larger company, maybe
quick question. Yeah. We're back. That's
right. So maybe if people don't know you're back yet, or maybe even negotiate that. Say, hey, team, I'll be back, but maybe let's not give my clients full on yet, for a week or so. That's what I mean about being intentional, right? Like really space things out so it's not all at once.
Yeah. I really like those. And I think as we get through this life cycle, I know we're wrapping up just in a few minutes, but thinking some of those things like pumping that can last for a really long time. And obviously, you have the child, and while a lot of us just think about the delivery and then you're like, oh my God, there's years of things to do. What kind of, Meredith, what kind of support do you generally see having for parents, both returning, but then ongoing, any of those benefits to help on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I think at Stash, at least, like the community of parents, as we've like kind of gone from startup and gotten more employees and as employees have kind of had kids, there's like the community has really grown. Like I think I could count on one hand the number of moms when I started at Stash, and now there's so many people post in. We're big on Slack. We have Slack as kind of the main way that we communicate internally. We're a fully remote company now, so a lot of people just get on there and want to share things about pumping, things about childcare, and it's not just women, it's men too, because they have all sorts of childcare issues. People just need to kind of let loose sometimes when their nanny doesn't show up or their kid's sick and they can't drop them off at daycare. Like really giving a space for that where people feel like they can just share, and people are like, oh, it sucks, I know how that is, but being really flexible. And I've tried to instill that on my team is like, you get your work done. I don't care if you have to take off 3 hours in the morning because your childcare fell through or you need to pick up early. I'm like, just get your stuff done. Use your schedule. I have a wonky schedule now that we're remote, where sometimes I have to shuffle kids around in the middle of the afternoon and then take calls from my car on, the library Wi-Fi and all sorts of things. So, but at the end of the day, if people get their job done, once they're back and onboarded, I try to be really, really flexible with where people are and what time of day it is, doing as much as you can asynchronously so people can really manage time and especially if you have kids to get places, or especially multiple kids to get places. So flexibility and autonomy, I think, is very much appreciated.
I think those are great. I think those are spot on words, as is wonky, also a great word. And then May's grace and space, if you want to give it that way. Deanna, any last thoughts as far as some of those, especially ongoing benefits? And, I know that Friday, I'm sure, like, as you said, and people can use that, parents, non-parents, for whatever your personal needs look like. But what else do you see that are some of those innovative benefits for post parental leave?
Yeah, I mean, we have some fantastic benefits, I think, for parents and just employees in general. I'll just name some non-exhaustive examples. So we have one of our benefits that a lot of our team members aren't aware of is there's free online tutoring from, I think, elementary through middle school in a host of subjects. And I think that's fantastic as a resource to working parents, to help their kids with school. And that's one example. We have other miscellaneous benefits like certain discounts on sort of amusement park tickets or vacation logistics. And those sound very attenuated from our main discussion today of parental leave. But in the grand scheme of things, I think it's helpful just in terms of when you have these resources available at your company, it helps with the rest of your life. And then I'll also just add, I think it's really important in my view to just normalize discussion of the multiple hats that each of us wears, and to talk about our lives outside of the office, whether the employee has kids or not. I think, most people have hobbies outside of work, for example. Some are caring for aging parents, for example, or other family obligations. There's pets. And so normalizing discussion about all of these other hats and obligations and interests that people have outside of work, I think helps working parents down the road, because then you can feel a little bit more comfortable perhaps talking about if your kid is sick or you need to step away to take your kid to and from school. And particularly for me, thinking about my team, we're a very global company. Most of my team is located in different geos from where I am. And oftentimes I'm on calls right during the worst hour of the day, which is when I'm trying to get my kids ready and out the door to school. And so being flexible and being comfortable, I think, just taking a call from the car, for example, without making it a big deal and just sort of normalizing it. I think if you're a people leader, I find it's great to set that example for individual contributors. And so those are some of my thoughts on that, Ashley.
I think it's out, and I think Melissa's probably going to jump on and wrap us up in a second, but I think a lot of these back and forths about preparation, communication, setting examples, and just this reflection that people have these real lives and work has to get done, but we also have lives. And for a long time, we couldn't bring the two of them together.
I think also just an acknowledgement that it's hard, right? But it's doable. There are so many people and so many teams and companies that all go through the same thing that gives me comfort, but it is hard. It's not an exact science, which is probably why we need the panel, but it absolutely can be done. But just an acknowledgement that being a parent is hard, and so congrats to everybody who's done it, and it's definitely possible.
Well, thank you to all of you for taking time to do this today out of your busy day. And it was really insightful. This is our last virtual event of the year. Keep an eye out for a packed schedule for 2023, and happy holidays.